Have you ever chosen the safe option just to feel stuck a year later? Maybe you took the job that paid less but felt secure. Maybe you kept your money in the same account for years, never touching it, never growing it. It felt smart. It felt responsible. But somewhere inside you, a quiet voice was asking a different question. What if this safe choice is not protecting me at all? This lesson is for English learners who want more than words. By the end of this lesson, you will stop mistaking comfort for safety. You will understand why the path that feels least risky is often the one quietly costing you the most. And you will know exactly how to take risks that actually build your future instead of risks that simply feel exciting. Let's be honest about something first. Most people are not lazy. Most people are not foolish. They work hard. They save carefully. They avoid debt. They do everything the world tells them a responsible person should do. And yet, year after year, their life looks almost the same. Same income, same routine, same small worries about money that never fully disappear. Why does this happen to careful, hard-working people? Because comfort is not the same thing as safety. Comfort is a feeling. Safety is a result. And these two things are not always connected. In fact, in money and in life, they are often opposites. Comfort is the real risk. Say that sentence to yourself again, slowly this time, and really let it sink in. The real risk was never the loan you were afraid to take, the business idea you never tried, or the investment you kept postponing. The real risk was staying exactly where you were, because staying still in a world that keeps moving is not neutral. Standing still is a decision made quietly, over and over. And like every decision, it carries a cost that eventually comes due, whether you notice it right away or not. In this lesson, we are going to look closely at that cost. We will talk about why avoiding all risk quietly guarantees an average life. We will meet real people who chose a different path, and we will meet the quiet, unnamed version of a person who never did. We will learn a simple way of thinking that smart risk-takers use, called expected value thinking. And by the end, you will have a clear, practical way to start taking smarter risks yourself, even if you consider yourself a very careful person. So take a breath. This lesson may challenge some comfortable beliefs. That is exactly the point. Lesson 1. The Comfort Trap. Here's the truth nobody tells you. Comfort does not protect you. It just slows down how fast you notice you are stuck. Think about a job you disliked, or maybe still dislike right now. The pay is fine. The hours are predictable. You know exactly what tomorrow will look like because it will look exactly like today. There is no danger in it, no sudden loss, no risk of failure because you are not really trying anything new. And that right there is the trap. A trap does not look like a trap while you are inside it. It looks like a warm room. It looks like safety. You tell yourself you are being responsible. You tell yourself you are protecting your family, your income, your future. And in a small way, that is true. But protection from what exactly? Protection from trying? Protection from failing? Protection from growth? The comfort trap works quietly, and that quietness is exactly what makes it so effective. There is no siren, no warning sign, no single dramatic moment that tells you this is happening. Nobody wakes up one morning and says, "Today, I will choose to stay average for the next 10 years." Instead, it happens through hundreds of small, reasonable decisions, each one easy to justify on its own. Staying in the job a little longer because leaving now feels risky. Waiting for the perfect moment to start saving properly, a moment that somehow never quite arrives. Waiting for more confidence before starting that business idea, even though confidence usually shows up after you begin, not before. Each of these choices feels harmless, alone, almost invisible, barely worth mentioning to anyone. Together, though, over months and years, they quietly build a wall around your future, brick by brick, until one day you look up and wonder how you ended up so boxed in. Try picturing it this way, because a clear image often explains more than a long explanation ever could. Imagine two rooms sitting side by side. In the first room, everything is calm. Nothing changes. Nothing challenges you. You feel safe because nothing is happening, and that stillness is comfortable in a way that is hard to argue with. In the second room, things are uncertain. Some risk exists there. Some real effort is required just to stay standing. But something else is happening in that second room too. Something the first room never offers. Something is also growing. Most people choose the first room and call it wisdom. But ask yourself honestly, is that room actually safe? Or does it simply feel safe because nothing forces you to notice the danger? The danger in the first room is slow, which is exactly why it is so easy to miss. There is no sudden loss of money here, no dramatic failure you could point to and learn from. Instead, 5 years pass, then 10, and one day you look around and realize your income never really grew. Your skills never really expanded. And the life you are living is simply the life you settled into, not the one you actually wanted when you first started out. That is the real cost of the comfort trap. Not a single bad decision, but 1,000 quiet ones, each one small enough to ignore. So here is the first shift in thinking we need to make together. Stop asking, is this choice comfortable? Start asking, is this choice actually moving me forward, or is it simply keeping me still? That underlying idea, that comfort itself is the real danger, is not because comfort is bad on its own, but because it is very easy to mistake standing still for standing safely. And that mistake is exactly what quietly builds the wall we talked about a moment ago. The safest room in the house can still be on fire. You just cannot see the smoke yet. Lesson 2. The math of playing it safe. Let's do the math, because numbers do not lie, even when comfort tries to. Imagine you keep your savings in a regular bank account for years. You never touch it. You never invest it. It feels safe because the number on the screen never goes down, and watching that number stay steady gives you a quiet sense of control. Yet there is a part most people never calculate, an invisible cost, sitting right underneath that comfortable number. While that number stays the same, prices around you keep rising, month after month, year after year. Food costs more, housing costs more. Almost everything you might want to buy quietly becomes more expensive over time. The value of your money, meanwhile, shrinks a little more with every year it sits untouched. This is the hidden cost of the safe path. It does not remove risk, it just hides the bill and sends it later. Most people avoid risk because they are afraid of loss. That is a completely human response, and there is nothing foolish about it. Nobody enjoys watching money disappear, especially money that took real effort to earn. This is exactly the point where two very different mindsets separate from each other, quietly deciding two very different futures. One mindset says, avoid all loss no matter what, at almost any cost. The other says, accept a small calculated loss now and then, because that risk is simply the price of real growth. Avoiding all loss feels responsible. Accepting calculated loss feels frightening. But only one of these approaches actually builds something over time. Think of it this way. A farmer who refuses to ever risk a single seed will never lose a seed to bad weather. But that same farmer will also never grow a harvest. The seed sitting safely in a bag is not being protected. It is being wasted. Its entire purpose was to be planted to risk the uncertainty of soil and rain in exchange for the possibility of far more seeds later. Your money works the same way. Every dollar sitting completely still, untouched, unused, unrisked, is a seed staying in the bag. It feels safe, but it stays exactly what it already is, nothing more, never becoming anything larger or stronger over time. And slowly, quietly, inflation keeps eating away at even that one small bite at a time, year after year. This is not a lesson telling you to take wild, reckless chances with everything you own. That is a different mistake entirely, and we will talk about it soon. This is a lesson asking you to notice something uncomfortable. The safe choice you have been making might not be as safe as it feels. The safe path does not remove risk. It just hides the bill and sends it later. So here is a question worth sitting with. What is your money actually doing right now, today, while you feel safe? Is it working for your future? Or is it simply waiting quietly, losing value, while you call that waiting security? Delay is not the same as safety. And once you understand that difference clearly, you can never quite unsee it again. Lesson 3. Average is a decision, not an accident. Nobody plans to be average. No one sits down at 20 years old and decides, I will aim for a life that stays exactly the same for the next 3 decades. And yet for many people, that is exactly what happens. So how does it happen if nobody chooses it on purpose? Nobody chooses to be average in one moment. They choose it every day. They pick comfort over growth. Think about the promotion you never applied for because you told yourself you were not ready yet, even though nobody ever truly feels fully ready. Consider the course you never signed up for because it felt like too much effort after a long day, and tomorrow always seemed like a better time to start. Think about the conversation about a raise that you kept postponing again and again because asking felt uncomfortable and staying quiet felt so much easier in the moment. None of these moments feel important by themselves. That is exactly the problem. A single missed opportunity does not change your life, but a pattern of missed opportunities repeated for years absolutely does. Average is not something that happens to you. It is something that gets built, one comfortable choice at a time. There is a way to see this more clearly, and it involves picturing two paths standing side by side, both available to you at every fork in the road. One path is called chasing comfort. It is smooth underfoot. It requires very little effort each day, and it feels calm, and calm feels genuinely good in the moment. The other path is called chasing growth. It is uneven, sometimes rocky. It asks something of you regularly, a hard conversation here, a new skill there, an uncomfortable risk somewhere further along. That second path rarely feels calm. Most days, honestly, it feels demanding. Almost everyone, if given the choice on any single day, will pick the path of comfort. It makes sense in the moment, but paths are not judged by a single day. They are judged by where they lead after years of walking them. The uncomfortable truth is this: growth was never going to feel comfortable at any point for anyone. If you are waiting for chasing growth to start feeling easy before you commit to it, you will wait for the rest of your life. This does not mean you must live in constant discomfort. That would be exhausting and unnecessary. It means noticing the pattern of choices you are making and asking honestly whether most of them are quietly pointing you toward comfort again and again, while you tell yourself you are simply being careful. Average is just safety repeated. If you want a different result than the one you have now, at some point, one of those small, comfortable choices needs to become a different choice. Not a huge, dramatic leap, just one decision made differently than you would have made it yesterday. Lesson 4. Risk has two faces. Here's what most people get wrong about risk. They treat it as one single thing. Either you take it or you avoid it. But risk is not one thing. It has two very different faces, and confusing them is exactly what keeps so many people stuck. Reckless risk closes your eyes and jumps. Smart risk studies the ground first. Picture someone walking into a casino and placing their entire savings on a single spin of the wheel. That is reckless risk. There is no research behind it, no plan, no understanding of the odds. It is pure chance dressed up as boldness. Now picture someone else who spends months learning about a business idea, testing it on a small scale, studying the market, and then investing a carefully chosen amount, knowing they might lose it. But understanding exactly why the odds are in their favor over time. That is smart risk. Both people are taking a risk. Only one of them is actually thinking. This is where fear plays a clever trick on careful people. Fear, disguised as caution, tells you to avoid both kinds of risk completely, and to call that wisdom. Caution built on knowledge tells you something very different. It says, study first, understand the odds, then act, even though acting still feels uncomfortable. Notice the difference. One caution is really just fear wearing a nice suit. It sounds reasonable, it sounds mature, but underneath it is simply avoidance. The other caution is not afraid of risk at all. It respects risk the same way a skilled climber respects a mountain, by preparing carefully and then still choosing to climb. If you have been telling yourself that avoiding risk entirely makes you wise, it may be worth asking which kind of caution you are actually practicing. Are you studying the ground before you decide? Or are you simply refusing to walk toward the edge at all and calling that decision wisdom? Smart risk is not about becoming fearless. It is about becoming informed enough that fear no longer makes every decision for you. If you have been nodding along so far, you are exactly the kind of person this lesson was made for. Leave a comment with the word risk so I know this is landing, and give the video a like if you want more lessons exactly like this one. In the next part, we are going to look at real people who understood this difference between reckless and smart risk, and who used it to completely change the direction of their lives. Lesson 5. The real icon beat. Look at what happened when a few ordinary people decided that comfort was not worth the price of staying still. In 1994, a man working a stable, well-paid job on Wall Street made a decision that confused almost everyone around him. He left that secure position to start an online bookstore run out of a small garage, with no guarantee it would ever succeed. His name was Jeff Bezos, and that small, uncertain risk eventually grew into Amazon, one of the largest companies in the world. But on the day he walked away from his safe job, none of that was promised. All he had was a calculated bet and the willingness to take it. Around the same time, a young woman working a steady job selling fax machines had an idea for a new kind of undergarment. She had about $5,000 in savings. Instead of keeping that money safely in the bank, she used almost all of it to develop her idea, spending years without any guarantee of success. Her name was Sarah Blakely, and that risk eventually became Spanx, a company worth hundreds of millions of dollars. She has often said the fear of regret felt bigger than the fear of failure, and that fear pushed her forward instead of holding her back. And before either of them, a man working in steady corporate management left that stability behind to take over a small coffee shop chain. Borrowing money and accepting significant personal financial risk to grow it far beyond what anyone expected. His name was Howard Schultz, and that chain became Starbucks. Notice something these stories have in common. None of these people were reckless. They did not close their eyes and jump. They studied their ideas carefully. They started small. They accepted the real possibility of failure because they had calculated that the potential reward was worth that risk. They didn't remove the fear. They just refused to let it drive. It is easy to hear stories like these and think, that could never be me. I do not have a garage, a bold idea, or that kind of courage. But notice, none of these people started with courage either. They started with a decision made while still afraid to take one calculated step forward instead of staying comfortably still. You may never build a company as large as Amazon or Starbucks. That is not the point of this lesson. The point is smaller and closer to your own life. Somewhere right now, there is a version of the garage waiting for you. A small idea you have not tried, a skill you have not invested in, a financial risk you have been too afraid to take, even though you have quietly calculated that it makes sense. Every safe life has a version of this moment it never took. The question is not whether you have what these people had. The question is whether you are willing to take one small, informed step the same way they once did, long before anyone called them successful. Lesson 6. The Anonymous Mirror. Picture someone you might already know. Not someone famous, just an ordinary man, careful and hardworking, the kind of person everyone describes as responsible. At every important moment in his life, he chose the safest available option. When offered a stable job with average pay, he took it instead of a more uncertain opportunity with greater potential. When he considered starting something of his own, he decided to wait until conditions felt more certain. When friends invested in things he did not fully understand, he kept his money untouched, telling himself he was being wise, while they were being foolish. For years, this strategy seemed to work. He never lost money in a risky investment. He never experienced the embarrassment of a failed business. He never had to explain to his family why a bold decision had gone wrong. From the outside, his life looked stable and sensible. Then 20 years passed. He looked around one day and noticed something uncomfortable. Colleagues who had taken calculated risks, who had started businesses, changed careers, or invested with real intention, were now in very different positions than he was. Some had failed along the way more than once, but others had built something significant, something his years of careful safety had never produced. His own income had grown slowly, steadily, and modestly, exactly as it always had. Nothing dramatic had ever gone wrong, but nothing remarkable had ever happened either. He never lost money. He just never gained a future. This is the part of the story that rarely gets told, because it does not involve a dramatic collapse or a painful headline. There was no single terrible mistake to point to. There was only 20 years of reasonable, careful, understandable choices, each one small enough to defend all of them, adding up to a life that stayed remarkably the same. If you asked him directly whether he regretted his choices, he might struggle to answer clearly. Regret like this does not arrive as a single, sharp moment. It arrives slowly, as a quiet, persistent feeling that something was possible and was never attempted. Some people don't fail. They just never begin. This is not a story meant to frighten you into recklessness. It is a mirror, held up gently, asking an honest question. If your life continues on its exact current path for the next 20 years, comfortable, careful, and unchanged, will you feel proud of that safety? Or will you feel the same quiet ache this man eventually felt? Lesson 7. Expected value thinking. Here's how smart risk-takers actually think, and it is simpler than most people expect. They do not ask, "Could I lose money on this?" Almost any risk carries that possibility, so that question alone will always point you toward doing nothing. Instead, they ask a more useful question. Judge a decision by its long-run average outcome, not by your fear of one bad result. This idea is called expected value thinking, and once you understand it, you start to see risk in a completely different way. Imagine someone offers you a simple deal. You can pay a small amount to enter a game. If you win, you receive a much larger amount back. If you lose only your small entry amount. Now imagine this game is fair enough that if you played it many times, you would come out ahead overall, even though you would definitely lose some individual rounds along the way. A fearful thinker looks at this deal and focuses entirely on the chance of losing that one small amount. A smart risk-taker looks at the same deal and focuses on the average outcome across many attempts. They understand something important. A single loss does not define the wisdom of a decision. The pattern repeated over time does. This is exactly how thoughtful investing works. One small investment might lose value, another might grow significantly. Individually, you cannot predict which result you will get. But if the overall pattern of decisions is built on solid reasoning, the average outcome, repeated across years, tends to move in your favor. Here lies an important dichotomy: staying invisible versus staying in motion. Staying invisible means making no decisions at all, avoiding every risk, and hoping that stillness itself equals safety. Staying in motion means accepting that some individual decisions will not work out, while trusting that a consistent, thoughtful pattern of decisions will move you forward overall. Fear counts the losses. Wisdom counts the average. This does not mean every risk is worth taking. Expected value thinking still requires real study, honest numbers, and clear thinking, not blind optimism. A reckless risk with a genuinely bad average outcome is still a bad decision, no matter how exciting it feels. The goal is not positivity. The goal is clarity. Something real changes once you actually adopt this mindset, and it changes how failure itself feels to you. A single disappointing result stops feeling like proof that you made a mistake. It becomes simply one data point inside a longer, more meaningful pattern. This shift alone is often the difference between someone who takes one risk, fails once, and never tries again, and someone who takes many calculated risks, learns from each result, and steadily improves their position over years, decision after decision. The next time fear tells you to avoid a risk entirely because of what might go wrong in a single attempt, ask yourself a different question instead. If I made this same type of decision many times based on solid reasoning, would the average outcome likely move me forward? That question asked honestly and consistently is one of the clearest paths out of an average life. Lesson 8. Building your risk muscle. Start smaller than you think you need to. One of the biggest reasons people avoid risk entirely is that they imagine risk only in its biggest form. Quitting a job completely, investing their entire savings, starting a business with no income for a year. Of course that feels terrifying. Almost anyone would hesitate at that scale. But smart risk-taking rarely begins that way. It begins small, almost quietly, and grows stronger the same way physical strength does, through repeated, manageable effort. Confidence is not the reason people take risks. It is the result. Consider a woman who spent years feeling nervous about any kind of financial risk. She had savings, but she kept all of it completely untouched, afraid that any mistake would be permanent. 1 year after learning about calculated risk, she decided to try something small. Not her entire savings, just a modest amount she could afford to lose without real damage to her life, placed into an investment she had researched carefully. It was uncomfortable. Her hands were literally shaking when she made the decision, but she did it anyway. That single, small risk did not make her wealthy overnight. That was never the point. What it did was something more valuable. It proved to her through direct experience rather than theory that taking a calculated risk did not destroy her. The world did not collapse. Her life continued, and slowly her confidence began to grow. Not because she had read enough books about risk, but because she had actually practiced it in a small, manageable way. This is what it means to build your risk muscle. You do not start by lifting the heaviest weight in the room. You start with something manageable, repeated consistently until your capacity naturally grows. Try this practical starting point this week. Something concrete rather than vague. Identify one small, calculated risk within your finances. Something modest enough that losing it would not damage your life, but meaningful enough that it requires real thought and a small amount of courage to attempt. Research it properly, taking the time it deserves. Understand the realistic range of outcomes, both the good and the disappointing ones. Then take the step, even while feeling uncertain, because the uncertainty is not a sign you are doing it wrong. You don't need to be fearless. You need to start. Notice that this approach sits completely apart from either extreme we discussed earlier in this lesson. This is not reckless risk closing your eyes and hoping for the best, nor is it avoiding all risk staying permanently in that comfortable, unchanging room. Instead, think of it as a third option, entirely deliberate, small, and repeatable. Exactly the kind of pattern that expected value thinking rewards generously over time. Each small risk you take, calculated and intentional, becomes evidence. Evidence that you can handle uncertainty. Evidence that comfort was never actually protecting you the way it claimed to. Evidence that a different kind of life, one built on thoughtful risk instead of quiet avoidance, is genuinely available to you. You do not need to change everything about your financial life this month. You simply need to take one small, honest step and then let that step teach you something the last 20 years of staying safe never could. Let's bring everything we have covered back together, because each lesson today was really pointing toward the same simple truth. Comfort does not protect you. It only slows down how fast you notice you are stuck. The safe path does not remove risk. It simply hides the bill and sends it later. Average is not an accident. It is built one comfortable choice at a time. Risk itself is not the danger blind risk is, while informed risk is something else entirely. Real people, ordinary at the start, chose small, calculated risks and changed the entire direction of their lives. And somewhere quietly, there is always a version of a life where none of that ever happened, where safety was chosen every single time, and where nothing remarkable ever had the chance to grow. Judge your decisions by their pattern over time, not by your fear of any single result. And remember that confidence was never the starting point. It was always the result of starting anyway. The safest choice you can make today may be the very thing keeping you exactly where you are. Comfort is the real risk. That is not meant to frighten you. It is meant to free you. Because if comfort itself is the actual risk, then taking one small, thoughtful step forward is not as dangerous as it has always felt. It might, in fact, be the safest decision you make all year. Keep listening, keep growing, and keep taking smart risks. And if you are learning English while you listen, keep going with that too. One lesson at a time. The same patient way. Real growth always happens. Before you go, I want to ask you something honestly. What is one safe choice you are making right now that might be quietly costing you your future? Not a huge decision, just one small, familiar choice you have been making without questioning it day after day, without ever really looking at it directly. Write it in the comments below in your own words, even if your English is still a work in progress. Naming it clearly in any language is often the first real step toward changing it. If this lesson gave you something worth thinking about today, consider subscribing so the next lesson finds you when you need it, whether that lesson is about money mindset or the next English word you are ready to learn. Thank you for spending this time here with me. I will see you in the next one.